Caley McGillvary is a fungiphile, and we're excited to interview her today as part of our Strange Intelligences lab. She explores and investigates mycelium, mushrooms. She grows mould. She's one of the most fascinating people I think I've ever met, and I'm really excited for her to have the chance to talk about her passion for the sporal world. So, Caley, welcome. Caley, you're a fungiphile, a fungi enthusiast, well known for your exciting excursions, hunting for different kinds of mushrooms and sporal life. Tell us about how you got into this business here, Caley.
Thank you, Maggie. I was living in Scotland, and I was spending a lot of time walking and running through some of the amazing forest trails there. In Scotland, they have a thing called the right to roam. So there's no trespass laws, and they've got a lot of built paths for people to access like the majority of the land. And I just started noticing more and more mushrooms around me. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I've always been really fascinated by these. I wonder if I can find out what they are, like, which ones are those ones? What do they do? And I was very lucky to come across a local club, which I joined. So that's now probably about a decade ago now. And I still help that club with some of their like web admin and that sort of thing. But now that I've moved back to New Zealand, I have been reaching out and connecting and with people, and it is amazing. So many people love fungi and love learning about them, and I feel like I'm only a part way into my journey, but I just enjoy learning more and more and going out into nature and finding just the amazing variety of fungi that we have in New Zealand, and really unique species here too. And yeah, it's incredible. I love it very much.
So, Kelly, is your background in a kind of natural science of some sort, or do you have a kind of ecological background that you draw on for this, or something completely different?
No, something completely different actually. So my background is in film and television. I wrote for television for several years after studying it at uni. I've always been horror films have always been my genre, so maybe that's what's led me into the fungi world, because it is just so amazing. It's just like you can't even make this stuff up. It's so cool. Yeah, so and I guess I'm very interested in environment, and I mean fungi have the potential to save our world, I feel, and I'm really interested in continuing to explore that and learn how I can help make that happen.
So I guess in horror films they're usually probably trying to kill our world, but what you're saying is there's the chance for us to save our world. Can you say a bit more about that? Like give us an example or some of the areas that you're kind of passionate about to do with that.
Yeah, sure. So there are people already working to look at ways that they can use mycelium to grow packaging for food that then just naturally biodegrades. So then that obviously reduces plastic. But also they've done experiments with fungi, and they will consume like oil, petrochemicals, and plastic as a food. So they can break it down and then make it so that it's it's nullified, it's back into nature, but without those plastic particles, as far as I understand it. And also things like saving the bees. Like they've done experiments where they've put like a tray of, I think, liquid or water with containing fungi spores, and then the bees have had to walk through it, and that's increased their resistance to different kinds of bee viruses and looked after them. There are just so many different applications. Yeah, I think that's all.
So For me, there's also one of the areas we're interested in is the sort of fungal computing area. So they're using spore species to power computers, or some interface between physical computing uh, and mushrooms, I think, or different kinds of mushrooms.
Yeah, I've read something about that they've given it so that it has the ability to move around, like an interfaced fungi with robotics, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. I know that they've done experiments with slime molds, which are not fungi, but it's like only fairly recently that they decided to put them in a different category. But they've used slime molds to like map out subway routes and that sort of thing, and it's just like a completely different kind of intelligence.
So that brings me to the fact that we're actually interviewing you as part of our Strange Intelligences lab, because we're utterly fascinated by different ways of being in the world and ways of thinking, for want of a better word, or reasoning in the world. Do you think that spore organisms are their own kind of intelligence, Caley?
Yeah, I do.
Tell me more about that. What do you think defines kind of a spore intelligence?
I think it's the like for me personally. I think sorry, I'll start over. I think for me it's the way that a spore intelligence doesn't have to make a choice, because they have the ability to explore all choices available to them, and then they can pull back on the choices that haven't worked and then continue on with the choices that are successful. And yes, that's how they like branch out. And also I think the way that, they travel through the world. So they're an intelligence that puts themselves inside their food rather than putting their food inside themselves. Yeah, it's a different way of being, and I'm here for it.
So I guess my question emerging out of that is, in terms of your resonance with spore intelligences, is there something about the way that you think or you see the world that resonates with that very thing that you're quite fascinated with? Like, do you like exploring different kinds of choices in your writing, for example, or how does that relate to your way of seeing the world?
Yeah, I think that it relates to my way of seeing the world is that I don't like to leave a path unexplored. Um, so often if I will be like in the bush and I'll see a path and I can't see where it is on the map, but I'm like just so keen to like know where that goes. So I always like find a time to go and explore and see where it ends. And that can lead you to some really cool places. And yeah, I don't know, it's like it's the art of getting lost, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because you also found your love for fungi in a place where they allow you to wander in that way too, right? So
Yeah,
Scotland is
absolutely.
unbounded. They don't have rules around trespass. So it's like an untrespassed terrain where you found these things that also don't worry about trespassing across anything to find out what they need. And so the two things, you're in the middle of those two things.
Yeah, that's right.
So what are some of the experiments that you do at home? You're not just foraging out there in the world for them. You've actually brought the fungal presence into your house, and not in a terrible way. We're not talking about exterminators or carpet cleaning here, Caley. There's some other interesting business that you're up to.
Yeah, so I am interested in all things kitchen science. I think is what I would term it. So I'll grow my own molds at home and different kinds of bacteria as well, which are used in culinary. Used for culinary purposes primarily. So there's an amazing mold. It's the koji mold, and it's like beautiful. It's this beautiful white fluffy mold that grows on rice, and it's like the base ingredient for miso and sake and amazake and a whole lot of other Japanese foods. There's also natto that you make with a kind of bacteria. It's like a fermented soybean food where it just creates this crazy sticky film. You either love it or you hate it, but I love it. And then I also will I grow my own fungi, and so like I will inoculate jars with different types of spores and grow mycelium in my jars, and then I will put that to fruit. So whether or not I'm going to like put it in like a casing and grow it inside, or whether or not I'm going to drill holes in logs and grow logs of different kinds of fungi, depending on how they like to be grown. And yeah, I've got my fridge. One of my fridge drawers at the moment is just fully, it's jam-packed with wood chips, different kinds of mycelium growing on grain, some wooden dowels. I've got some things. I'm very lucky. My husband is an arborist, so he's able to bring home logs for me and mulch as required. So I'm very privileged in that regard to have access to a whole lot of different mediums to grow fungi on. I do actually I've got a jar of contaminated mycelium here where it's like a mould and a mycelium that have gone to war. So this is the mycelium is the white, and then this is the contamination that's coming up, and they'll be battling it out. In nature, when there's two different kinds of fungi that are living in that same space, they are highly competitive, and they'll fight unless they're compatible fungi, in which case they'll become friends. So, yeah.
Drawing it back to you, do you think that is anything to do with your personality at all? Like, are you a competitive person, Caley, when it comes down to it? In a small environment, will you kind of fight the other fungi?
I don't know if I will. Yeah, I think I'm more likely to try and befriend it. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
So that with all your experiments and things that you're doing, do you think about, I guess, the fungi that live inside humans? Because obviously there's different kinds of, for want of a better word, things that grow inside us and in our gut and various other things. Is there a relationship between that and kind of human bodies?
Yeah, I think that there has to be some sort of almost symbiosis happening. They're a little bit, a give and take. I don't know if it's symbiosis is the right word, because I don't necessarily think that those relationships are equal or that they actually need to be. It does make me think of the relationship that fungi have with plants and with trees as well, in terms of sharing of resource. And I know that those relationships are often not equal, but we're still learning so much about how they all work. And I think that there's so much more to learn about how fungi operate within our own bodies and how we interconnect with them. And I'm keen to learn more.
So I guess with climate change, the impact on temperature, moisture levels, all sorts of things, fungi becomes a great friend, or it can also become a great killer in a certain sense, right? Because there's obviously trees and various other things that are impacted by better conditions for growing, for example. How does that work in terms of fungi in the future?
This is like making me think of like sci-fi horror scenarios.
I also thought about that, right? I was thinking about your horror thing. I was like, like a dystopian universe where the fungi slowly takes over, for example.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that any of the scenarios that we think of and that have been enacted in science fiction or horror would ever be able to become reality. But that being said, we do have a common ancestor, us and fungi. I think it's like a couple of like billion years back. We're definitely closer to fungi than we are to plants. So, heck, I'm not sure. Like fungi are they're what brings they're in between. They're that decomposing stage to give rise to new life, right? So if you've got fungi in your soil, or your mulch, it breaks it down into this beautiful, rich soil that then looks after it and will give like a seedling like a much better start. So perhaps if fungi took over, it would just be to help wipe the slate clean.
Yikes. Chilling, but said in such a lovely way. Caley, what is your favourite horror film involving fungi? Like, where are the ones where because I was, browsing through one of my favourite browsers last night, and I was looking at, Spore. I was looking at War of the Worlds, the one that what's his name, Tom Cruise did. There's a lot of things that have fungus growing in them. I think. What is your favourite one?
It's The Girl with All the Gifts, which is it is an intersection, so it's fungi and people, but also fungi have taken over the world, and they've got this, they're just like all growing into everything. There's these huge mycelial structures, and I think at some point in the film there's this huge fire, but what it is that actually sets off all of the spore pods, and then it just like eradicates the rest of humanity that haven't already got the symbiosis going on where they've got the fungi inside them already. But it's great. I'm like, I know a lot of people talk about The Last of Us more recently, and I loved like some of the ways that they did the fungi coming out of people. But when they were like, "Oh, it's cordyceps," and then I was looking at it, and I'm like, "Well, that mushroom looks like cordyceps. That doesn't." It really cracked me up. Because they're an amazing genus of fungi. We actually, a group of friends and I were in Pukenui Forest very recently, and we found this really cool spider that had been taken over by cordyceps, and like all of the mushroom body had like erupted from out of its exoskeleton. It was pretty amazing. Oh, sorry, spiders don't have exoskeletons. Sorry, just erupted out of its body.
Because there are, as you're saying, a particular kind of fungi that invades and then grows within things, is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, they're like zombie fungi. They like take over, and then they will force an insect or a spider to climb up high before they kind of freeze it, and then it dies, and then the fruiting bodies will push their way outside of the creature's body, and they push them up high so that when the spores come out, they can rain down on the widest possible area and then find a new host.
Wow. I feel like this may be the very first interview I've done where we need a content warning at the beginning, Caley. It's utterly fascinating, though. Does this these kinds of themes involving kind of power dynamics taking over, agency, dystopia, etc., do they inform your writing, like your creative practice, which is part of who you are as well? Or are you writing about butterflies and fields and like, tell me a bit about how this relates to your writing.
No, I think that I would be much more interested in writing, on the darker side of things. But I think that, I think with my writing, I'm more interested in exploring relationship dynamics through different genres. I think that horror is an amazing genre for exploring relationships and relationships under pressure. Often happen over a really short span of time. Those timelines are really accelerated, and you put everybody in a pressure cooker and see what happens. Whereas I don't know, like I think that maybe there's like quite a few different sides to fungi. There is like a very like aggressive side, but there's also this very like explorative and more gentle side as well. I have to be so careful when I'm inoculating jars with spores and things like that, because so often the fungi that I'm working with are not going to be dominant against a mould. Although molds are still fungi, they're like much more robust than the like traditional sort of mushroom species that I work with. So yeah, I guess yeah, like with koji, I can just make sure that everything's clean, and very rarely will the koji let anything else colonize. Yeah, see, there we are. It's like the only good time to use the word colonize is with fungi, in my opinion. But yeah, they will resist anything else being able to colonize that rice, or barley, or the other medium that you're using. But yeah, have to be. It's so easy to get contamination unless you're working in sterile lab environments for other kinds of fungi.
So I guess harking back to that question, what you're saying in terms of writing, what you're saying is not necessarily, but you're dealing with people dynamics, and actually fungi has a lot of dynamics in it. What's more dominant? How do we interrelate to one another when we're quite different? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think so, and also because some fungi are very much the sort of partnership fungi, and then other fungi are kind of more parasitic. So,
just like our relationships in life, basically.
I think so.
Do you have an ethics protocol you work with fungi? Like I noticed before you said, I don't inject this in. Do you do that because it doesn't ruin your batch, or do you do it because you love fungi and you want to take care of the fungi there? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I want to take care of the fungi as best I can, and also I want to give them their best chance to grow well, and like I will hopefully get to eat the mushrooms that I grow, or then go on to use whatever batch of mold that I've grown for other purposes, and it's so beautiful as well. Yeah, I really am hoping to get a microscope so that I can do some time-lapse photography of some of the things, because that's the thing with mushrooms. You've got this beautiful macroscopic world, but there's also the whole unseen microscopic world, which is amazing as well. Yeah, so I'm keen to explore that more.
Caley, given the real interest you have in these kind of unusual aspects, or the deep reverence you have for things that people sometimes overlook, behind it, do you have kind of a value structure, or, for want of a better word, a belief system? Or for some people in our interviews, it might be faith or spiritual practice. Is there a way of looking at the world that allows you to see these things? What kind of mindset do you think you would describe yourself as? Because it could also be a kind of almost a scientific mindset that doesn't believe in any of that. I'm kind of interested in the beliefs behind practice.
I've got friends who are really hardcore, like that science mindset. I believe in beautiful chaos. So I don't like I am very resistant to the idea of things happening for a reason beyond logical action consequence. I believe that life's made up in so many different like interweaving threads, and and it's the chaos is where the beauty is found. So sometimes you'll have incredibly terrible things happen, but there's also wonderful things happening, and those things are all happening at the same time. And we don't I love having control over my own self and my own environment, but I know that I actually have very little control in the very grand scheme of things, and I think that there's wonder in that.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you where you think I really want people to know this about fungi, given how passionate you are about it? Anything that you feel would be fascinating or important for people to be aware of in this parallel and extremely strange world that you're working in with these very unusual intelligences?
I think that just reinforcing that idea that, so we've got the animal kingdom, you've got the plant kingdom, and then actually fungi are their completely own kingdom. They are not plants, they're not animals, they are just like their own thing, and they're like amazing. Like, I think so. They are like us, they rely on like decomposing like organic matter to get energy. They can't get energy from the sun like plants can. But then like they've got cell walls, and plants have got cell walls, but their cell walls are made up of chitin, which is like insect exoskeletons. So it's like so amazing. Like they're their own kingdom, and I think that that means that there is just as much variety as, like, think about like how many different animals and how many different plants there are, and all their unique ways of reproducing. Man, there are so many like spore delivery mechanisms that fungi have, and it is just out there, man, out the gate. So, I think that they definitely get overlooked. I think that they're seen as a subset of plants, but they're their own thing, and they're incredible. I'm really biased here because obviously.
Thank you, Caley. So you do foraging walks in New Zealand, in Whangarei. You do those, as I understand it, kind of autumn. Is that right? If people are wanting to book to do things with you.
Yes, I'm hoping to kick them off again in April next year, just when we start seeing more fungi emerging as the weather starts to get colder again, following our summer. And I'll probably do that all the way through until like late July, maybe early August. There are always fungi around, but it's just that during those colder periods, there is a lot more and a lot more variation that can be seen. So yeah, if we find stuff to forage, then we will do so, but in a responsible way. But we're really out there to just find as many species as we can and look at them and learn about them.
So I think Awhi World are really keen to invite ourselves along to one of those, and maybe we'll do a follow-up filming of you and your fungal expedition.
Okay.
And in the meantime, we'll have some links available for people to contact you if they're fascinated by what you're saying, because I know you're really passionate about sharing your knowledge and so forth.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And thank you again for coming. And this is definitely, Awhi World talks about portals, alternative realities, parallel worlds, etc. And I feel like you've given us a really fascinating portal into a world that is so important to our very existence, but so overlooked at the same time. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Maggie.